Chapter 1. The City Beneath My Feet. First, you belong to it. Then you learn to walk away. There's a particular stillness that comes just after dawn in the countryside. The birds have already announced themselves, early and unrepentant. The mist is still undecided, draped halfway across the field like a bedsheet someone gave up folding. And the kettle, if timed right, begins to rumble just as the first shaft of light reaches the sill. Out here, the day doesn't start with a shout. It stretches, yawns, looks around slowly to see who's watching. I wasn't born into this quiet. I earned it. I was a city lad, through and through, born into brick and concrete. Grew up measuring the passing of time by bus schedules and the opening hours of the corner shop. My lullabies were sirens and late-night arguments 2 floors down. And I knew the exact moment when the first train rattled the windows at dawn. It was the city's version of a cockerel. City life teaches you not to linger. You walk with purpose, even if you don't have one. You cross roads like you mean it, and you never, ever make eye contact on the tube. That's how you end up in a conversation with someone who tells you their star sign and their favourite conspiracy before you reach Finsbury Park. But the city had its magic. It really did. The hum of it, the low, constant vibration that made you feel like anything could happen. Night buses full of strangers, half asleep, and all travelling in the same direction, even if just for a little while. The chip shop at 11:45 p.m, where salt, grease, and overheard laughter turned a takeaway bag into something sacred. And the rooftops. Oh, the rooftops, where you'd climb just to breathe different air and feel, for once, that the sky was still there. I remember watching the world go by from bus stops in winter, standing on heated pavement grates, while snow made a soft lie of silence above. I remember the faint metallic taste of the underground, the smell of electrical heat and other people's perfume. I remember street lights flickering on before the sun had quite disappeared, like they were bluffing, trying to get a head start on the dark. But slowly, without permission, the city changed. Or maybe I did. That's the truth of it. We rarely notice the moment things stop fitting. You just wake up one morning and realize the boots you wore every day have started rubbing your heels. And it's not the boots that changed. The shop where I used to buy my morning paper closed. The old woman who ran the newsagent passed away, and no one opened the shutters again. The family-run cafe with cracked vinyl seats and tea that could dissolve spoons turned into a juice bar that charged £5 for something green and miserable. The record shop vanished. The bakery was reborn as a vape shop, which always smelled of burnt mango and disappointment. Even the pubs stopped feeling like pubs. Same names, different souls. The old lads who once held court in the corner were replaced by tablets and wine lists and live sports on 17 screens. And the people, they didn't change all at once either, but they started looking through each other instead of at each other. Everyone walking with headphones in, eyes down, filming life instead of living it. I once saw a couple take a selfie in front of a building they didn't even look at. Click. Smile. Gone. There was a time I loved the anonymity, that wonderful weightless feeling of being no one special in a sea of people. But then it stopped feeling free. It started feeling lonely. I didn't leave in a blaze. There was no great moment of rebellion. I didn't storm out of a flat with a box of things and a monologue about how the city had lost its soul. It wasn't a declaration. It was a drift. The kind of drift that begins when you realise you haven't been into town for weeks. And when you do go, it doesn't recognise you anymore. I didn't run. I just stopped chasing what no longer saw me, and so I left. Not loudly, not all at once, just away. I still visit now and then, out of politeness mostly, like checking in on an old friend you once loved but no longer trust with your secrets. But I no longer walk those pavements with belonging in my step. Now I visit as a ghost, invisible in a place that once knew my name. I live now where the silence breathes, where the grass grows tall in summer, and even the wind takes its time, where birds argue in the hedgerow like neighbours with history, and where my mornings belong to a cat who believes the whole field is his personal dominion, and I am but his valet. But that part of the story, how I came to this quiet place, and what I found here, that begins in Chapter 2. Chapter 2, a different kind of quiet. I didn't move in alone. Loki and Kuma were with me, my companions, my guardians, my walking contradictions. The moment I opened their carriers in the new flat, it was like loosing two small furry missiles. They exploded outwards, tails high, eyes wide, paws pattering across floorboards like they were mapping it all for a military report. Loki, bold as brass, utterly fearless, jumped straight onto the kitchen counter, then onto the top of the cupboards. He stared down at me like a landlord surveying his new tenant. Kuma, heavier and slower but no less curious, waddled purposefully from room to room, like a seasoned inspector on a final round. Drawers were sniffed, curtains were climbed, every corner was explored, every crevice examined. By the time I'd made a mug of tea, they knew the place better than I did. That first night, it was minus 16 degrees Celsius outside. A proper cold snap. The sort of cold that doesn't creep in. It announces itself and settles in like an old lodger. There was no central heating, just an old electric heater in the living room. A second one I hadn't yet found in the box marked MISC, and an increasingly creative use of jumpers. I'd retreated to the bedroom with 2 hot water bottles and a layered ensemble that made me look like a Victorian chimney sweep. Somewhere around 1:30 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a message. A blue glow lit the room, and in that soft spectral light, Loki appeared. He had pushed the bedroom door open, silent as a ghost. He stood by the bed, his breath visible in the air like a tiny plume of smoke. Not just mine, but his. I could see the vapour from his nose curling gently into the light from the phone screen. The windows were frozen on the inside, lacework patterns of frost climbing across the panes, like nature trying to reclaim the glass. I lay there grinning like a fool, breath misting in rhythm with the cat beside me, utterly thrilled. It wasn't just new, it was familiar. The kind of familiar that lives deeper than memory, something stored in the bones. I'd known this cold before. Not this exact room, not this specific night, but this kind of life. I grew up in houses where winter lived inside, where the mornings began with lighting the fire, and you could write your name on the window with a finger. There were no thermostats back then, just wool jumpers, thick socks, and the blessed magic of a hot water bottle slipped between the sheets an hour before bed. There was a kind of pride in it, resilience dressed in flannel pyjamas. And yes, summers were just as extreme. Blazing heat that baked the brick walls all day and made the evenings feel like opening the door to a clay oven. But the coolness of a stone floor in bare feet, the shade beneath an old tree, the soft buzz of bees and distant hum of a lawnmower, that was summer's mercy. Here in this little rural flat, once a dairy, now barely converted, I had returned to something I hadn't realised I'd missed. It wasn't a step backwards. It was a circle closing, a reconnection to the quiet and the cold and the comforting smallness of life done slowly. Loki slept by my feet that night. Kuma claimed the warm spot between the heater and the back of the armchair, and I lay there in layers and frost and feline company, grinning like a man who had just found the world again, waiting for the morning chorus to begin. Mornings came slowly in those early days, the kind of slow that isn't about being lazy, it's about not being chased. There was no commuter clock ticking, no battle to catch a train, no queue for lukewarm coffee in a paper cup with someone else's name scrawled on the side. Here, the day waited for you. Kuma was always first. He was my shadow. The moment I stirred beneath the blankets, he was there. Silent, patient, heavy as a bag of flour, and twice as warm. If I sat, he sat. If I stood, he followed. If I paused to tie my boots, he would sit so close his whiskers tickled my hand. There was something deeply reassuring about it. Not needy, not clingy, just presence. The sort of company that doesn't need to speak to be understood. Loki, on the other hand, watched this with growing suspicion. Perched on the windowsill like a feline gargoyle, tail flicking slowly, he observed the unfolding morning with a theatrical air of indifference. But he wasn't indifferent. Some mornings, as I poured the tea and Kuma settled beside me with his eyes half closed, Loki would leap down, land with a theatrical thud, and insert himself directly between us, like a furry bookmark in a very specific story. He'd wedge his back against my leg, extend a paw onto my foot, and stare pointedly at Kuma, as if to say, "He was mine first, you know." Kuma, for his part, didn't care. He'd simply shift to the other side. Two sides of the same coin. One calm, one mischievous, both mine. The flat slowly became a home, not through furniture or decoration, but through rhythm. The familiar sound of Kuma's heavy paws following me from room to room, the way Loki would disappear and reappear with the timing of a stage magician. The strange comfort of waking in the night to find one of them curled beside me, or both of them snoring on the chair I'd meant to sit in. There were little rituals. I'd open the curtains each morning, and Loki would jump onto the sill to inspect the weather. If it was sunny, he'd nod approvingly and stretch. If it was raining, he'd give a long silent stare, as if the clouds had personally offended him. Kuma had no such concerns. Rain or shine, he followed. To the kettle, to the back door, to the window where the birds gathered like a morning briefing. He was there, always. We spent long hours in silence, the three of us. And in that silence, something healed. Something I didn't know had been frayed. There was no pressure to speak, no performance to maintain. Just the steady company of creatures who loved without question, who asked nothing but to be near. It's a rare thing, that kind of closeness. The sort of thing that turns a place into yours. Chapter 3. The Quiet Between Gears. I'd spent 9 years moving other people's things, pallets, crates, barrels, sometimes entire stacks of anonymous cargo labelled in black pen or stuck with peeling barcodes. I worked in warehouses with concrete floors and the smell of diesel and spilled coffee, climbing into forklifts before the sun rose and clocking out when the world was already dark again. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And in its own way, it was honest. You moved things where they needed to go. No spin, no jargon, just forward, backward, up, down. Until one day, I stopped. The agency didn't call. Then they did, only to say the work had dried up. Shouldn't be long, they said. Just a lull. But the lull became silence, and the silence became something else entirely. I'd already applied for funding to retrain as an instructor, something I'd done years before, back when I was a qualified approved driving instructor. Teaching came naturally to me. Lesson planning, delivery, patience. The rhythm of instruction was in my bones. But funding, as it turns out, moves slowly when you need it quickly. 6 months. That's how long I waited. No work, no guarantee. Just the bureaucratic theatre of promises delayed and decisions deferred. And during that time, something strange happened. I should have been anxious, bitter, broken even. But I wasn't. I was happy. Not ecstatic, not giddy, but quietly, stubbornly content. I learned how to stretch a tenner across a week without feeling like I was losing. I knew where the reduced shelf was at every supermarket within walking distance. I knew how to make a roast chicken last 4 meals, and how to make salad taste like comfort food. More importantly, the boys were fed. Loki and Kuma had the best I could give. Frozen white fish fillets, steamed, cooled, served like they were dining in a feline bistro. They'd pad into the kitchen with the solemn confidence of cats who knew they came first. And they did. We didn't just survive, we lived. Walks, window watching, games with balled up receipts and stray shoelaces. Cold evenings made warmer by 2 heavy forms curled beside me, one on either side. Mornings started with paw pats and tea. Evenings ended with slow blinks and deep sighs. The flat was cold, but the winter was kind that year. Mild, forgiving. We had snow once or twice. It gathered lightly across the garden, dusting the compost bin and the crooked old fence, transforming everything into a fairy tale sketch. Kuma would press his face to the glass, his breath fogging a little circle. Loki, not one for awe, would swat at the falling flakes like they'd offended him personally. I wrapped myself in jumpers, ate warm food, and watched the season pass without fear. Because somehow, despite everything, I had what mattered. But it wasn't all a warm-hearted folk tale. There was a colder truth underneath it. I was being punished, not for anything I did, but for the shape of my life. The government had rules, sensible-sounding nonsense designed in sterile rooms by people who've never skipped a meal. I lived in a 2-bedroom flat, alone. And so, they decided I didn't need both rooms. The punishment? A reduction in my housing benefit. It didn't matter that I wasn't using the spare room as a ballroom or a sauna. It didn't matter that no one wanted to rent just a single room in a cold rural flat with a man and 2 cats and very little to offer but kindness and tea. Number I was penalised for empty space. The money they gave me to survive, the bare minimum they themselves deemed necessary, was then reduced. I was, by their own arithmetic, forced to live below the minimum. But I made it work. Because I had to. Because pride only feeds you so far. Because I refused to let my boys go without. They didn't understand the politics. They didn't care about austerity or local authority cuts. They just wanted fish, a warm spot on the chair, and the assurance that I'd be there when they woke up. And I was. Every day. Every night. Then, in spring, a letter came. Funding approved. 10 days later, I was on a course, pen in hand, folder open, answering questions before they were asked. Lesson planning? Easy. Instructional technique? Already wired into my habits. Presentation? Like breathing. It wasn't learning, it was remembering. Dusting off skills I hadn't forgotten, just folded away. The course was 10 days long. I passed with ease, more than ease, with quiet pride. And the gears began turning again, not at full speed, not all at once. But there was motion. I was working again, driving again, teaching again. But I was different. I no longer saw work as identity. I no longer measured myself by my payslip or the size of my week. I measured it by the purr of a cat on my lap after a long day, by the comfort of a homemade dinner, by the joy of being greeted at the door by two tails, upright and thrilled, no matter how late I returned. And that was success. Chapter 4. The long stillness before the knock. The life I built suited me. It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't loud, but it was mine. And it fit like an old coat found at the back of the cupboard that still had warmth in the sleeves. Each week moved like a slow-turning wheel. Work, travel, quiet, return. I met new faces by day, shared stories by the roadside, offered guidance in car parks and classrooms, then drove home through winding lanes toward the stillness that waited like an old friend. Kuma and Loki made that stillness golden. They weren't just pets, they were part of the landscape, like the ivy on the windowsill or the tree stump in the garden where I once sat for hours watching the sky change colour. They aged gracefully. Kuma, still my shadow, grew heavier with time. Not in body, but in presence. He moved slower, followed less, but his eyes never left me. He would settle by my feet and remain there for hours, a silent anchor in a world that still insisted on rushing. Loki mellowed, though he never lost his mischief. He would stare into corners like he was waiting for something only he could hear. Sometimes I wondered if he did hear things, echoes perhaps, from somewhere I hadn't yet learned to listen. Years passed. They always do, whether you count them or not. The garden changed. Some plants came back every spring. Others disappeared without warning. Birds shifted routes. Neighbours came and went. And one winter the frost came earlier than usual and stayed a little longer. Kuma's paws started to slip on the laminate floor. Loki slept deeper. Their games grew shorter, their meows softer. And I knew. It wasn't all at once. These things never are. But slowly, like a tide withdrawing, their energy faded. First Kuma. Then, in time, Loki too. I don't need to describe it all. Some things don't need words. But I remember the silence. That first morning when no pause followed me into the kitchen. The windowsill untouched. The chair undented. A home can be full and empty all at once. I didn't replace them. You can't replace a soul. Not when they've curled beside you through snowstorms and salary gaps, through lonely Christmases and morning coffees, through the 1,000 little rituals that form a life. I stayed quiet for a while, but not long. I couldn't. 2 months after Loki left me, the silence in the house became too loud to bear, too heavy. The sound of nothing became a weight that followed me from room to room. I didn't need noise. I needed a heartbeat. And then, Red arrived. Not in a blaze, not in replacement, but in answer. A little flame. Orange, whiskered, unapologetically alive. He was young, inexperienced, curious about everything and cautious about nothing. From the moment his paws touched the floor, life resumed. Not the same life, not a copy, but a continuation. Another heartbeat in the home, another soul to share the silence. and with him a new chapter began. Chapter 5. The Red Flame. The house didn't feel empty anymore, not after he arrived. He was small at first, smaller than he should have been, I thought. A little underweight, a little uncertain, ginger from head to tail, with wide, expressive eyes, and paws that seemed too big for the rest of him. I named him Red. It wasn't complicated. Some names arrive fully formed. He was Red. Bright, warm, fierce, and slightly unpredictable. His first day here was a mixture of nerves and audacity. He darted from room to room like a pinball, tail held high, eyes scanning, paws skidding. One moment he was under the sofa, the next he was halfway up the curtain, and by tea time he'd claimed the centre of the bed like a tiny, purring monarch. He didn't know the history of the place. Not yet. He didn't know about Kuma's steady silence or Loki's sidelong glances. He didn't see ghosts. He only saw me. And he decided that I was his. The bond formed quickly, faster than I expected. I thought I'd feel hesitation, some quiet betrayal of memory. But there was none of that. Only the gentle settling of something right. Red had a confidence I hadn't seen before. A sort of unearned certainty. He knew the kitchen was his, the windowsill was his, the bedtime routine was his. He took over without resistance, and I let him. At first he followed me around like a confused apprentice, watching me tie my boots, staring intently as I took a shower, positioned just outside the curtain, occasionally chirping commentary, as if making sure I hadn't drowned in there. He even developed the habit of supervising litter tray cleaning, hopping up on the counter like a foreman on a building site. And the mornings... the mornings. Red invented a new tradition. He would attack my feet, gently but persistently, every morning around 4:30, as if to say, "It's time. The day is waiting. Let's go." I'd stumble to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and while it boiled, he'd do laps, racing from hallway to sofa, bouncing off walls, pausing only to stare at me with that wild, dilated pupil look that said, "Isn't this brilliant?" He brought laughter back. Unforced, effortless laughter. The kind that comes from watching a cat slide across the floor while chasing a leaf he brought in from the garden like a trophy. We played chase games. We watched birds together. I began talking to him without realizing, narrating my thoughts, consulting him on dinner, apologizing if I dropped a spoon. And he listened, not always with understanding, but always with presence. He was my shadow now, in a different way than Kuma had been, less quiet, more animated. Where Kuma moved like a gentle old soul, Red moved like a flame across dry grass. And in that movement, I found something I didn't know I'd lost. Momentum. Then came the harness. With Kuma and Loki, it had been a wrestling match. Somersaults, theatrical flops, staged limpness. They'd eventually learned the harness meant adventure, but it took effort and negotiation. Red took to it instantly. Whether it was his youth or the lingering scent of those who wore it before him, I'll never know. But he stood like a soldier during fitting, blinking, curious, calm, as if he knew, as if he remembered somehow. That first step outside was careful but deliberate. He sniffed the air, pawed the stone step, blinked up at the sky. And then he walked forward, tail high, eyes wide, world waiting. We didn't go far, just to the old stump, the stump, where I once sat in silence with Kuma, watching the world pass gently by. I knelt beside Red, told him the story. He sniffed the wood, pawed the moss, then flopped beside it in perfect trust. And we sat there, the two of us. The next chapter, the next rhythm. What struck me most was how he adapted, not to the house alone, but to me, to the routines already in place, to the pace of the life I'd built. He followed the same path to the window in the morning, sat in the same patch of sun by the kitchen, watched me lace my boots like it was part of a sacred rite. And when I left for work, he watched, always from the kitchen windowsill. He'd follow me with his eyes as I reversed down the lane. Then, without fail, he'd turn his gaze to the neighbour's roof. There was usually a pigeon there, and just like that, the sadness vanished. Eyes narrowed, ears forward, hunter mode engaged. The quiet grief of my leaving was always replaced by the thrill of hypothetical murder. That pigeon had no idea what it was saving me from. Some things have changed. There's a new shape on the windowsill, a new rhythm to the morning games, a different voice in the silence. But the heart of it all remains. The kettle still whistles, the boots still lace, the sun still casts its low light across the garden fence just before I leave for work. And now there is Red. Not a replacement, not a stand-in, just himself, entirely, unapologetically himself, a young soul in an old house, a little flame burning where the hearth once cooled, not overwriting the past, but walking beside it. This life suits me still. A few hours of people, then peace, weekends to breathe, Christmases wrapped in stillness, and the soft weight of a cat who chooses to stay near. I've known many versions of myself. The city shadow, the warehouse worker, the man with frost on the inside of his windows, and two cats who made the cold feel warm. Now I am the man who rises early, drinks his tea in silence, and is always watched by a red flame, waiting to chase pigeons the moment he turns the corner. And that is enough. That is more than enough. Chapter 6. The Sanctuary Within. There's a world out there shouting, endlessly, desperately. Everyone speaking louder than the last, afraid they won't be heard above the din. The news scrolls, the influencers preach, the adverts shout, and even the people meant to lead seem lost in the performance of panic. The message is always the same, just dressed in new clothes. You are not enough. Buy more. Do more. Fear more. And if you're not careful, you believe it. You start to think that happiness is something sold in weekend courses or subscription boxes. That meaning is found in hashtags and hustle. That value is measured in likes, in income, in how many screens your face appears on. But it's not. That's not life. That's noise. The real sanctuary is something quieter, something slower, something most of the world forgot how to listen for. It's in the sound of birds arguing in the hedgerow, in the feel of warm fur pressed against your side, in the way a kettle begins to sing just as the morning mist lifts from the field. It's in choosing not to respond to chaos with more chaos, in stepping away, not out of fear, but because peace has become your rebellion. You don't need to save the world. You just need to stop letting it steal your soul. So here's what I've learned. Find something to care about that isn't connected to a screen. A garden, a craft, a long-forgotten book. Something that rewards attention with silence, not dopamine. Spend time with animals. They don't lie. They don't posture. They don't sell you anything. Eat well, not extravagantly, just honestly. Good food doesn't have to be expensive. It has to be real. Let the world shout. You don't have to answer. Not every argument is yours to join. Not every trend is yours to follow. Unconsume, unlearn, unplug. The most radical act you can perform in this upside-down world is to be content, to be deeply, quietly okay. They don't want that, the ones who sell fear. They want you hungry, frightened, chasing shadows in the hope that one of them might be happiness in disguise. But happiness isn't found by chasing. It's found when you sit still long enough for it to come to you. Young Red doesn't care about politics. He doesn't fear climate collapse or worry about economic graphs. He finds joy in watching pigeons and rolling on sun-warmed stone. He knows what I had to learn the long way. That being is enough. That companionship is found not just in noise, but in closeness. That the same patch of sunlight, visited daily, becomes a temple. He reminds me every day that life, real life, is small and sacred. It's not a brand. It's not a broadcast. It's a shared glance between souls that trust one another. And when I lie on the floor beside him, watching the last light slip across the field's edge, I know I am not missing out. I am exactly where I need to be. Not lost, not left behind. Free.